and welcome to the Career Changers, the show that shares the most inspirational career change stories with the world. I'm your host, Elisa Martinic, and today we are going to talk about career change in the science and tech industry with Dr. Nicole Tischers. Sorry, I didn't ask you before.
It's the most difficult challenge of the whole conversation. Cheerske.
Cheerske.
Yes.
A scientist turned coach that is helping women in science and tech to get noticed and gain the recognition they deserve. We will discuss her career change from scientist to coach and the wider challenges of transitioning career in the STEM industry. Well, hi, Nicole, and sorry for the mispronunciation of your surname.
Not a problem, Elisa.
And thank you so much for joining us. I should have asked you before, I forgot.
That's totally fine.
So let's start with your career journey. You have an history of being a scientist and then change your career into coaching. So can you tell us how did you become a scientist?
I always was fascinated by science. So I always knew this was a field that I wanted to go into. And luckily, I also had teachers who kept that interest in science, because sometimes if you have teachers that make it just too difficult and too boring, you're just like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm never going to study this. And so I ended up studying food chemistry. And from there, I went into the cosmetics industry to do my PhD there, because in Germany, cosmetics fall into the same, let's say, governmental area of responsibility like food products. And so that's how they fit together. And yeah, and that's what I did. And that's where then, basically what then also led into the start of my career, where I was working in consumer goods innovation and product research.
And what was your dream job when you were a child?
Yeah, so I couldn't have really, when I was really a small child, it was to be a science teacher. And so I would give, I would teach classes to my imaginary classroom, but it was always about science, something that I had just learned in biology or whatever. And but I was told that I'm too sensitive to be a teacher because kids are so mean, and I would never have fun doing any of that. And so if I love teaching science, but if we take the teaching away, what is left? Science. And still, somehow I kept pursuing that. I found it interesting. It came, other than physics and math, it came easy to me to understand, how science works and these principles. And yeah, that's how one thing led to another.
Yeah, so in some ways you were attracted to the field since you were a child.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, you left your job to become a coach. Why did you make this decision?
It was not really me leaving the company to become a coach, but it was more out of the necessity because there was a restructuring, and for 1.5 years I had very, very little to do. So instead of having a burnout, what many people have from having too much to do, I had a bore out. It was horrible. And in order to get out of this hole and this low energiness and find a solution for my situation, I went to see a coach to help me. And within 4 sessions, he had me, back on my path, trying new strategies, getting my creativity and energy back, bit by bit by bit. And I was just so amazed, like, how did he do that? I want to be able to do that too for people. And that's when I started coaching, training, and all these things. But at the same time, through all the new engagement that I did inside the company, a new door opened up where I could join a completely different function and then doing change management, which is a lot of, people focused work like coaching is too. And yeah, that's basically kind of like how, let's say, the universe nudged me away from science into this more people focused topic. And so in a way, we're coming full circle again back to my passion for teaching back then. So now I also work with people, but in a different way.
So, while you explain already why did you choose coaching and not any other job, but did you have a time in your life before then this where you actually were thinking about changing career, and maybe you were thinking what actually could be my next job or my next career?
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing. The way I was raised, or the mindset that I was raised with, and that is still very prominent in Germany, is that you pick one thing that you study and learn to do, and then you do that for the rest of your life. And so for me, when I studied food chemistry, it was clear. Okay, it's like I'm going to start working in the lab, and after a few years I become a lab manager, and then I progress on that career, something like that, and I would have never even imagined to do such a radical sidestep or do something so different. And I first had to see that, I was working in a very international company where I had a lot of young colleagues also from other countries, for example from the UK, and they didn't have that mindset at all. They were just like, okay, of course I studied this, but maybe I'm going to do this now for 2 years, and then maybe if I'm interested, I'm just going to go into HR, or I'm going to go into supply chain, and I just learn on the job. And that people might think I'm naive or I sound silly, but that at the time was mind-blowing for me. It's like, where did they get the audacity from to think, this is like how ingrained this idea of learning something, being an expert, and then sticking to it for the rest of your lives. But I'm really grateful for having seen those those other pathways, those changes in careers in other people, because that sort of gave me permission to even just ideate that for myself.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think as human beings, we reflect on what we want to do in our lives when we are quite young. And then maybe that we take a path, go to university, thinking that that's going to be our career forever. And then, we experience different things. It can be redundancies, burnout, or bore out, as you said. And we start to maybe look at different, we want a different lifestyle. So then that can take us to a different path. But definitely, yeah, I think that what is ingrained in our minds sometimes can be the biggest challenge. So in your experience, what are the pros and the cons of a career in the STEM industry?
The big pro, if you like it, is you get to immerse yourself in a field that you really find fascinating. So I know, just, when I think back to doing my PhD, which was in the industry, or to then go on and develop products, and to just have this thing about, where it's science, and you use the scientific principles to understand, like, is my product formula going to be stable? Like, how do I have to change the ingredients? How do I do this and that? And then at the same time, making something people will want to use, and that you can at some point, buy off a shelf. It's just so, I don't know, I just found it fascinating. And then, but others may have other areas of fascination, where there's like, okay, I don't know, whatever, microscopy, for example, being able to really study the tiniest things and to get a very good understanding of how things work on this microscopic level, and or any other thing. So we go into those fields and we study science often because we are so fascinated by it. And then being able to, literally getting paid to do what you find fascinating, I think is a really big pro of going into the industry. And then the cons, I guess, I guess they're not too unique to STEM. The more I speak to people also in other professions, is some people get fed up and burned out with industry or corporate life, where when it becomes just all about output and less about quality, where it's a lot of demands that are placed on you in terms of high workload, in terms of constant change of direction. That actually was one thing that was one of the things that was frustrating for me when I worked in product innovation, was that 90% of the work that I did never saw the light of day. I was just making that for the bin, because you never know like which direction the company is going to go in next. Mm-hmm. So while that's all fair, it's also something that we need to be prepared for mentally. And then when we look at women in particular, many women tell me that they feel at a disadvantage compared to their male colleagues, for example. But again, it's like, we can talk to women scientists about this. We can talk to women lawyers about this. We can talk to women accountants about this. I can imagine many of them experience that the same way.
And what are instead the pros and cons of being a coach?
Well, again, it's like, for me, this is a recurring theme. So I'm all about doing work that you love doing, because we have to spend 8 hours a day doing that. So it better be something you enjoy. So if that is something that you like to do, not everybody enjoys coaching others. That is very clear. So then if you don't, then don't do it. So that can be a big pro when you get to do what you really like. You get to help other people on their transformation. And yeah, so it can be really brilliant. You can work a lot in a creative way. The con to this is that building a business or your own practice, I find it really, really hard. Maybe I'm a bit too stupid to do it, but I always say is that getting a PhD in chemistry is a piece of cake compared to building a coaching practice. There's a whole lot of new things that you have to learn, marketing and general business knowledge, these kind of things I never had to be concerned about when I was just in R&D.
So lots of learning and changing the mindset. So if we dig more into your career change, we just gave an overview of how you went from being a scientist to become a career coach. So you mentioned that you actually started thinking about your career change out of a bore out. So you were bored at work. Was it also there a particular moment in your life when something happened that actually maybe pushed you towards a change?
No, that was really it. That was the defining moment. I mean, I didn't know at the time that this would lead to a change in career. I just knew it couldn't go on like this, and it was also not overnight. This was like a gradual decline into total boredom and and just like not being able to get up off the couch, because everything I had to do all day was manage myself. And that, it sounds ridiculous, maybe, oh, you're so lucky getting paid to do nothing, but no, it wasn't fun at all. And so that was really, I guess the pain of that situation became so big that I was just so open to anything that was new and exciting, anything that gave me something to do, so, a bit of a sense of purpose, that I'm, still here to add value somewhere and not just, I don't know, like keep my chair warm. So so that was really, that's actually a good question. I'd be curious, in an alternate universe, if I hadn't had this bore out, if I would have switched away from science too, or if I would still be in a lab somewhere. So that would be interesting to know.
So what were the challenges that did you have to overcome to transition from a career in STEM to coaching?
Okay, so first thing was, to to learn a new skill set, but that's okay. You know, you can take training for that. You can read books, all of these kind of things. And this is something that when you studied a scientific field, you're very used to learning new things. So that's okay. Also, the company was very supportive in putting me on a role where I had no prior experience in. So that was really great. So in that perspective, I was lucky enough to having been given the chance to do that. But I guess what was the hardest for me was that I had to start from zero. Before I did that, I had no idea how much my self-confidence was tied to how much expertise I had in a field. Yeah. And so obviously, if you know, one day you have almost a decade of experience through all the studies and the work that you've done and so on, and you know the answer, or you can quickly you know, find a way to get to the answer and these kind of things, and then you get into a new field. So first of all, coaching and change management was new, and it was in a new function, which was supply chain, where I didn't understand what people were talking about. It's like, what are those words that you're using? And so like I knew nothing, and from knowing everything and being the go-to person for everyone to it's like, I'm sorry, what do I have to do? I mean, I learned quickly, and I got myself the resources and the help and the support to really be able to do my work properly and these kind of things. But man, it took a while to, you know, really get over this loss of expert identity.
Yeah. So, and today, what is your typical day like?
So it's split between my responsibilities for my employer, where I'm still, you know, doing these change management projects, and the day looks a lot like having tons of meetings and talking to people and planning work that we have to do, analyzing situations. What does it look like? What's working? What's not working? Okay, what are we going to do next? And so on. So that's a good part of my day. And then basically my side business, so to speak, my coaching practice is a mix of either I'm giving a training to a group for, you know, for an organization, or I'm coaching individual clients, or I'm writing an article, or I'm, you know, it's like hosting an interview similar like you do with me right now. And so it's very very varied.
Yeah, so it's exciting.
Yes.
So if we talk more in deep about the career change in the STEM industry, do you think women receive enough support with their careers in the STEM industry?
That is a good question. It's of course difficult to generalize that. If I take what the ladies tell me, then no. They feel they're not getting enough support. Are they asking enough for support? Probably not. So, you know, there's these two sides to the matter, basically. But yeah, it's, I mean, everybody or so many companies around the globe, they're waking up, they're paying attention to diversity and inclusion, to helping fill the female leadership pipeline and so on. So effort is being made. But if you look at, you know, gender reports from different organizations where they investigate, like, I don't know, it's like, what's the gender pay gap? And it's like, what is the percentage even of women at certain levels in an organization and so on, then it really looks like we still have a way to go in order to have the same opportunities for women and men, for however you identify compared to the rest of the population. And then also, you know, it's like, no matter what your particular aspect of diversity is, you know, in terms of being for disabled people, for people of color, for whatever kind of, you know, religious background, any of these kind of things. So there are a lot of differences in opportunity.
Yeah, I find it curious you say that, do we ask for enough support? Because sometimes That's one of the most difficult things to do, when we feel uncomfortable with our feelings or our situations. But also sometimes, do we know who to ask support for? So I think that's maybe one of the difficulties that people may face, not knowing who to go to when they have some challenges. So what are the biggest challenges that women in STEM have to face in their careers, emotionally, financially, or on the practical side? I guess it could be, maternity, for example.
Mm. I mean, let me just look at it's like my last few clients that I had, and for them, okay, I'm going to be very firm now, but for them, the biggest challenge they have to face is the obstacles in their own head. So I don't want to negate the fact that maybe, yes, the workplaces as they work at as the slightly favoring men, perhaps. Maybe there's a culture or an expectancy of a certain type of person that is promoted more often than people who have different personalities, for example. But all of these women, once we started working together and once they started to be proactive about how they talk about themselves, how they interact with others, and how they spoke about their work, then things started to shift real quickly. So yes, so I would say, I know this is like, I mean, there are so many articles about like what are the obstacles for women in STEM. So I don't need to repeat this here, but what I observe is even in the better companies that really pay attention to, then the biggest obstacle is really often in our own heads.
Mm. And what type of support is missing out there for women in STEM? Generally, I mean, if they want to progress in that field, or even if they want to change their careers.
Yeah, so if we want to speak from a company perspective, then things like transparency. You just mentioned that sometimes we might not even know who I have to talk to in order to get access to more opportunities. So making this transparent on how things work, that is something a company can do. A company can also, train their leaders in order to, basically help them build their capabilities so they can really draw out the best in all of their people and not just the ones that are standing at the very front anyways. And then working with their women in particular is really helping them build on their strengths, embrace their own uniqueness, start to develop the strategies and the courage to start building their network, finding ways to go about these things in their own unique way. And this is something, I mean, if you have been raised and if you have been conditioned to be quiet, to stand back, to let others, take the first step and to just wait to be discovered, then even if you are put in an environment that would allow you to step up and raise your hand and come forward and so on, then it doesn't mean that you immediately, oh, okay, so I'm just gonna shed all of this and like I'm like a new person now. No, you have to learn how to do this. It's new skills that you have to build, new mindset that you have to adopt, and it just doesn't fall out of the sky. So anything that companies can do to offer their women, like coaching or like specific training programs to develop these kind of things, that's helpful.
So through your coaching practice, how do you help women in STEM to get the recognition they deserve?
So for me specifically, I focus on, or I work with women who are in their current role and who really just want to be positioned as an expert. It's like they want people to know what they know. They want to be approached to be part of projects. In the longer run, they also want to be setting themselves up for bigger opportunities, promotions, these kind of things. But at at this point in time, it's really more about, so really like, how can others know who I am and what I can do? How can I become a go-to expert? And so that's what we're working on, really. So identifying their strengths, finding ways for them to speak about themselves and their work in a way that it's strategic, but also it doesn't feel weird, and and then also how to reach out, how to build networks. And I mean, truth to be told, much of these things they already know intuitively, but it's like they need this extra little nudge and encouragement and accountability to actually go out and do it, because it's something they're not used to, and so it feels uncomfortable.
So, well, if we look more at your experience and background, do you have any interesting or funny stories to share with us from both careers, being a scientist and a coach?
A funny story. I guess one thing, I mean, it's not funny, but
it can be sad too, doesn't matter. Interesting.
Okay, so there's one situation that still stands out to me. I find it a bit amusing looking back, because I can see how much I went wrong in that situation, but I didn't know any better. So it was a situation where we had a meeting about preparing. So we had a product in the pipeline that we wanted to scale up for launch, so for our first production. And we were also discussing the innovation pipeline. So what other new projects would we want to fill this pipeline with? What do we want to work on? And it was a mixed meeting, so different teams were there. So me and my boss from the innovation team, but there were also colleagues from marketing. And I remember marketing was trying to give us, an idea of what they wanted. And it was so fluffy and it was so intangible. It's like, how can I possibly go into the lab and do something with this now? And so I kept saying to her, yeah, but if you want me to start doing the work, you have to give me a briefing. You have to give me a proper briefing. And she said, no, I'm not going to give you a briefing. I cannot, no, we don't know that yet. I can't. And I was like, and we kept going, we kept saying the bloody word briefing, and it didn't resolve. We just eventually, everybody just went into a break. I think everybody got very uncomfortable. And I was like, how did we go wrong? Years later, I was already in a different department. Years later, I learned that in her world, where she worked in the company, the word briefing meant that, so this was the final stage, the final sign off before we go into production, mass production. This is not what I wanted from her, not by a long shot, but that just illustrated to me how quickly we can have misunderstandings. And I guess this also ties into the coaching, of where it's a lot about helping people to get clarity, just asking questions until we're sure we really know what we mean, but it's like just this, what a huge misunderstanding, and we really butted heads over this one tiny word. So yeah, this is something that I still remember.
Yeah, this to show how much communication is important. So what life or transferable skills have you learned from both jobs?
Asking questions, yeah. So in science, you ask a lot of questions, but more on the technical side, it's like, how can I set this up? What do the conditions need to be like? What is my next step? What does this data mean? How else can we interpret this? What might have gone wrong? What are the implications? You ask these types of questions. And then as you go into change management and coaching, you also ask questions, but you ask questions not to get an answer for yourself, but to help other people think, So things like, okay, what's really important right now? Where do we need to go? What might be the downsides of this path? What other risks do you see? How else might we do that? And how else? And how else? And so it's really learning to ask really good questions and stay curious for long enough to really explore and discover.
So what type of advice would you give to anyone looking to change their careers?
I would say, first, understand really what type of person you are. Are you someone who is very risk averse, who wants to take a safe path, who wants to have a certain level of security and stability and predictability? Or are you someone who is a bit more of a risk taker, who is open for the unknown and the surprise and the unexpected, and actually feels good when this happens? So, and depending on which side you're leaning on, you might want to take different steps. So if you're more, if you're happy to take risks and jump into the unknown, then you can literally jump just try out new things completely. If you're more on the risk averse side and you're hesitant to let go of, from what you have, because you're not sure you will really like what is coming next, and find out, small ways how you can immerse yourself in that, either through volunteering or through taking on an additional project at your company, or by shadowing someone in a different department. These kind of things, like, what are small steps for you to just try it on for size before you make a complete decision?
And what would you say to women in STEM that are struggling to get the recognition they deserve, apart getting in touch with you, of course?
I would say I have this little quote card in my office that says, if nothing goes right, go left. And so I would say, try this. So if you're unhappy and frustrated with your situation, look at what have you been doing so far, because these are the things that got you there. I'm not saying these things are wrong, but they might not be the ones that you need to be doing in order to get somewhere else. And so if those things aren't working and getting you where you want to go next, like, what is one of these things that you can start doing differently?
And well, the last question, if you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say to your younger self?
Try more different things. Because I was so science for so long. I had no idea of, all the other things that the world has to offer.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us today and sharing your inspirational career change story. And last message for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tune in for a new inspirational episode of The Career Changers. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Elisa.
Bye.